This is not a debate, it's hopefully a discussion between us and you for the benefit of our readers. It can be a discussion between you and you two. So if your opponent says something you'd like to follow up on or disagree with, please do so. Please try and be civil. And we've done a bunch of these today and a bunch of these yesterday. This is our last one today. We're going to cover a lot of ground fairly quickly. So if we cut you off, it's not because we're being rude, it's because we're tired. We've done a lot of these things.
You're being too honest.
So we'll start by asking you each to introduce yourself. Whoever goes first, briefly describe the geography of the district, and please state the office that you're running for. We're ready.
Representative, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I also never know where to look.
And you look at us.
Am I looking at you guys?
Yeah,
Okay.
look at the flannel
So that
shirts.
we are in profile on the video. So thanks for having us. My name is Barbara Smith Warner, and I am currently the state representative for House District 45. The numbers don't have much significance in and of themselves, but the district is one of the many Portland districts, and it runs from about 24th to about 148th, with 84 being most of the southern boundary, a few jogs onto Gleason, and the northern boundary goes around Prescott. So it goes kind of from the edge of Irvington out through Maywood Park and Park Rose.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
Sure. I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, where my dad was a college teacher and my mom worked for a public television station. I moved to Washington, D.C. when I graduated from college and lived there for about 10 years doing legislative and political education for a number of labor unions, worked on the Hill for a little bit, and then ended up moving to Oregon in 1999. So I've been here. It'll be 20 years next year.
Okay. What brought you to Oregon?
I had worked in, like I said, for labor unions, doing legislative and political work. And as a matter of fact, between 93 and 98, I spent between 3 weeks and 3 months of every year in Oregon got sent out for various campaigns, both organizing and political, and ended up meeting my husband on one of those and moved out here, and we got married about 2 years later.
What unions are sending you out?
Excuse me?
What unions are sending you out? Excuse me.
Mostly AFL, letter carriers, NALC, the National AFL-CIO. I think I came out for AFSCME one time. Yeah.
Do you currently work when the legislature is not in session?
Well, yes, but not for pay.
Okay.
I'm only working as a legislator right now. When I was appointed, my husband and I agreed that I would have a chunk of time, I would get through that short session, get through a full cycle, and then we'd reconsider. And we have not actively had that conversation. It's a hard thing to do.
Appointed which year?
Yep, I was appointed, I just say January of 2014.
That's when Denbrough moved up to the Senate?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so the problem is that because my work background is, mostly political, it's hard to figure out something to do that would not be an innate conflict of interest. So I honestly have not quite figured out what I can do, and I appreciate the flexibility to still be able to spend a lot of time with my kids.
You could put $20 bills in the Oregon lottery terminal nearest your home.
I could do that. Thank you. I will bring that suggestion home, and I think my husband would enjoy that very much.
It does good things.
It does good things, but it's not for investment purposes.
No, 50% payout. I was born in San Francisco.
Tell us your name.
Oh, sorry. Jamie Woods. James is the way it's usually put written-wise. I was born in San Francisco, and my family slowly got gentrified all the way down the peninsula, out into the Central Valley, and I ended up moving from there out to Illinois, where I finally got a high school diploma. College was a bit of a wander around, but eventually completed a degree in economics at University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. And so I am my first in my family to get a college degree. Then went on to the University of California, Davis, earned a PhD there, and got all doctored up. We moved to Oregon in also 1999. And so it could have been 2000. I was doing some commuting there. I got a gig. So I ended up with a startup firm called Quantec, which is energy efficiency program evaluation. We also did a bit more of that. and was there for a couple of years before I decided I really didn't like the consulting life that much full time because it's extremely stressful, and ended up with a position or two around the area, and eventually a assistant professorship at Portland State University.
What do you teach?
Primarily engineering economics, but I also teach energy economics, public utility economics, program evaluation. Periodically I do things like microeconomic theory at the master's level. And I'm known for being the guy that shows up at the seminars and tells you how your stats are a little bit off and how to fix them.
So you're a tenure track professor?
I am not. I'm non-tenure track. So I'm not adjunct, I'm not tenure track. I'm part of the new ones that have academic title, but lack the ability to get tenure.
So how does that work? Why, they just say you're in the track or you're not in the track?
Yeah. Generally speaking, there's adjuncts, which are the extreme
Right.
part-time.
Right.
Then there's the tenure track ones, which have a clock. You get hired, you got to have so many publications, so much service, and you're out.
Yeah.
With me, it's just you're here, you have a promotion path, which is the same as your tenure line faculty members.
Yeah.
But if anything bad happens, you boot.
So you have no job security?
Well, how do you replace me? That's the usual one that's there. PSU has extremely low salaries. We have difficulty attracting people. PSU also is in the midst of a budget crisis. So our president just announced in the Senate and in front of the institutional board that we have a completely unsustainable financial structure, can't possibly meet it. We are currently doing a few things that look like we are driving down to the basement as far as some quality goes, a bit of the classes. It's quite alarming, actually.
So your job security is very similar to our job security.
Oh yeah, I can go at any time.
How long have you been at PSU?
Since 2004, I think. I had to check my CV for that. I'm really bad at trying to remember
Well,
numbers.
that's close enough. Why are you running for office?
Originally, it was because I didn't think that she was treating the district very well. But that's just because I got used to Denver. I think that's what it mainly is. And so there was a lack of communication, and I also wanted a greater focus on making sure we had cap and trade and on education in Oregon in general. So it's K-12 and higher ed at the same time. Since then, and here's where the daylight will start to shrink between the two of us, her communication has been much, much, much better with the district. She's had listening sessions, she's had coffees, we've got additional updates on what's going on in the legislature, and she's also joined 2 interim work groups, one on the graduation rate for K-12 education, and the other one was she joined the cap and trade work group too. So the daylight between us has significantly vanished.
Aren't we calling cap and trade jobs and invest or something?
Clean energy jobs.
There you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm the technical guy, it's
So
cap and trade.
why did in your view, from a policy perspective,
Uh-huh.
did you look at the legislation?
Yeah, actually I was.
So what did you think of it?
Which one? The
The-
1071 or the 4000? Was it the one in 2017 you want to look at? 17 you want to look at, 2018?
18.
The one in 18 was, fixed some of the flaws that were there from the original piece of legislation. I had put in some testimony that said you need to take care of a couple of things, figure out what you're going to do when the price is on the floor. Because the California markets, old professor of mine, Stephen Borenstein, said, look, it's going to be on the floor about 50% of the time. It's only going to be in the middle about 12% of the time. You need to be able to handle that. So they do have now a mechanism that's there in the legislation. Perfect. They also have an emergency piece, which allows anyone who says this is truly a revenue bill to get it immediately referred to the Supreme Court in Oregon. That was absolutely brilliant, by the way. Few things that aren't there is making sure that there's no market power exercised in the markets. So roughly 6 of the firms are going to have to buy half the permits, and there's about 7 to 10 that should get about 3/4 of them. So they can really depress the prices if they wanted to. So no matter what, we have to make it so that we're connected to a larger market like California and Quebec, and make it so that we're connected enough so that we can have our allocations traded on a futures market, because that's where most of the transactions are. The final piece that's missing, which is alarming, is we haven't specified exactly how to adapt when that price is down on the floor, because if those can be stored, this is the banking provision, it means that it will very likely never get off the floor and will essentially be a very low carbon tax. And that's the last little piece I was concerned about. There were some other bits and pieces in there, but I think they mostly got fixed in the bill.
When you're out with your new and improved communication to constituents,
Yes.
what do you tell people that you have done for them that has made their lives better?
Sure. I think most of what my focus on is really being a part of a team in the Oregon House Democratic Caucus, which is promoting really strong progressive policy. And honestly, in the short term, in the last year and a half, it's been how can we continue to be a bastion against what the federal administration is doing? Whether it is doing work for the Dreamers and the DACA recipients to make sure they can still get in-state tuition, to keep them able to get driver's licenses, to the Reproductive Health Equity Act, and ensuring that no matter what goes on at the federal level, the right to a full range of reproductive services, including abortion, is in state statute. So that really is what I focus on, is being kind of an active part of that caucus and somebody who helps push some of those bills through.
Is there a bill that you sponsored, co-sponsored, that you're particularly proud of your role in either conceiving or pushing through the building?
Does it have to have passed? I'm still very proud of the work I've done on oil trains, even though I have not yet achieved my goal, which is to establish a consistent West Coast system of contingency plans for the transmission of oil by rail in this state. Even though it has not yet gone through, it has been a fascinating exercise in. Somebody told me when I first started that there's state law, there's the Constitution, and then there's railroad law.
Yeah, that's about it.
It is extremely powerful stuff. The folks who wrote that back in the 1800s, when the folks who established the railroads, they were not messing around. It's a very narrow, there's not a lot we can do as a state. And I think I found some good stuff for us to do that I'm continuing to work on.
So
And Union Pacific is a formidable opponent.
Indeed.
Captain's Raid passed some time ago in California. They're already building a high-speed rail from Northern California to Southern California. We've been talking about it for a decade.
Yeah.
It hasn't passed. Why not?
That's a great question. I think there's a combination of, there's issues of scale. They have an economy that is just so much larger than the Oregon economy that you really cannot. I mean, the shorthand I always think about how big a state is how many congressional representatives they have. They have 54 and we have 5. So they have almost 11 times the amount of people and the accompanying, I would argue, economy with that. That is a lot of it. They also have a full-time legislature, which meets year-round every year. Now that has its pluses and minuses, but one of the things policy-wise I would say is they are able to kind of, it is a long process to get anything through. And we in a 2-year period have 5 months and 5 weeks, whereas they have 9 to 10 months every year to keep working on it.
You want to take a crack at that? Do you agree with that assessment as to why that legislation has not passed here?
That, and we have more powerful rural areas. I think that's what it comes down to. It takes about 7 years for concept to legislation in the state, and that's about the number I usually hear about. And so we're a little bit off, but it's on average. And so the scale, given what we've been talking about for 10 years, is just about right. And we do move a little bit slower on these things. We have more stoppages, we have more strings and barriers in our Constitution, like the problem that the cap and trade bill has with dealing with the taxes that are there on gasoline, the highway fund. There's places you don't see necessarily everywhere. But you're right about the scale being a problem. That's why I've always advocated making sure that we're close enough to California so the market power doesn't go into play, and we can still make it so that we can connect to those future markets so that that market power really doesn't harm some of the constituents here.
So you said that since thinking about getting in the race, you've moved closer, there's less daylight between the two of you. Well, where is the remaining daylight? We're looking at 2 pretty progressive Portland Democrats. So tell us where you differ from the incumbent.
Where were you on ban the box?
For it.
It was for it. So I was against it.
Why?
So that was a basic one. Increased discrimination against African Americans was the typical one that's there. And this is,
Let me back up there. We went by that too quickly. So you were for
for ban the box.
banning the box.
Mm-hmm.
which has been sold as an anti-discrimination measure, no?
It is anti-discrimination against felons, but the problem is that once you pull out this one piece of information, are you a felon or not? Employers were often statistically discriminating against the African American population. And so
Is it more likely that they would is it?
Yeah.
Really?
So they did an audit study in New York and New Jersey, and it's just a working paper right now, so it hasn't been published yet, but the methodology is perfect. It's not a problem. What you do for an audit study is you get two people that are alike, except for that characteristic that you're concerned with, African American or not. You send them to go ahead and go for a job with identical characteristics, and you check and see if they get an interview. And what they found was, prior to Ban the Box, this is New York City, New Jersey, the Caucasian guy, I think was a guy most of the time, was getting a second call back 7% more likely. And then after Ban the Box, it jumped to 45. So it increases the amount of statistical discrimination.
Why?
Pardon?
Why?
Well, because high incarceration rate of African Americans. That's why. So if you have no information, you just take a wild guess and you're like, oh, balance of probability. That's the way it works.
All right, other places where you would distinguish yourself from 40%?
The other one would be things like, are you rent control or not? To allow or not? This is where we
Yes.
still have to consider some of these things too. Similar possibilities are there too for a kind of statistical discrimination against minorities. And the state has a long and kind of poor history with dealing with minorities going straight back to founding, and we just got to be very careful about it.
I'm surprised, so your objection to rent control is not that it constrains supply, but
Yeah.
that you don't think it constrains supply?
I figured if anyone's going to impose it, they're going to take into account the possible costs and benefits that are on that side. I just wanted to point out that there is this additional cost, and the cost accrues to one specific community which is already having problems. And so my suggestion, and this is one that's...
So why, again, I'm not
Yeah.
disputing, I haven't heard this before.
This is a new argument to me too, I'm interested.
Okay, sorry. You do know the classic ones that are there from the econ side, which is locking people in,
Yes.
having large, and so on. Okay. So the problem is that on occasion you do get some kind of statistical discrimination again. So there's again, a nice little working paper that it's really hard to do with an audit study just because rent control is so rare. But in some circumstances, you end up sorting the poor people and the richer people into really separate groups. And in some other places, and it really depends upon implementation, you end up having extreme segregation of the African American population that's there and an inability of them to get into the rent control housing. The usual stories that you get are things like the rental agents and the landlords are kind of projecting the belief that everyone else doesn't want them there, and that's not why they're doing it. But it means that we could have this problem. What I am suggesting we do, if we are going to have rent control, is that any city that has to do it, do a quick little audit study to find out exactly what the level of discrimination is right now. Similar to what we talked about with the employment. And then say, oh, that's too high, there's a bit of a risk. And then possibly if they want to implement rent control, set a limit and say if it goes above this level, we got to back off on rent control.
Well, I believe, haven't we had numerous studies like that on housing here, where they've sent in people to just get rental units already. That, I would argue, I think that's already a well-established problem here. And on the Ban the Box stuff, I would just say, while I did support that and will continue to, it's only a small part of the whole justice reinvestment concept. That if you think about the real issue with among the issues with our criminal justice system are, who's kidding that it's 3 strikes and you're out? You have 1 conviction and you're in jail and you're screwed going forward. People won't rent to you, they won't, that's dealing with a job issue. But the more we can do to keep people out of that system, and to, instead of sending them to a lifetime of not being able to get housing and jobs and other things, keeping them out of that, giving them the wraparound and support services, whether it's drug and alcohol treatment, whether it's parenting, whether it's whatever kind of education, job training, and then you shift that whole narrative and projection of where they end up. And we've done some of that work, and we need to we need to maintain that going forward. And it's something that I'm continually astounded that the Republicans in this state are not bigger supporters of, because the Koch brothers, as you may have heard, they have finally kind of seen the dollar signs on that.
And they did pass some nice bills in 2015 that covered a lot of the remediation of folks that have been in prison. So it was things like certification they're ready for employment, post-incarceration support that's there.
Started in 13, even before I was there, it started in 13, and then
Yeah.
there have been kind of a series of bills over the last couple of biennia.
An alternative to ban the box, though, is essentially a relatively small subsidy to employ a felon, someone who just got out. And that's kind of a direct way of doing it that doesn't quite have the same risks to these other populations. It makes it direct. It does have a dollar amount that's associated with it, but it doesn't push a cost on somebody else.
So, in your couple of sessions in the building, what bill have you worked on that didn't pass that you're most disappointed in?
Can I use the same answer? I was going to say, I think I would say the oil trains again. And also, I'm actually going to stick with that. That has been, honestly, that's something I'm the most proud of, and it is a great frustration that it continues not to. I voted for the House Bill 2004 in the 17 session, which indeed would have provided rent stabilization, and that is an extremely high frustration.
And that bill would have also banned no-cause evictions.
Correct.
Was it a mistake to pair those two together in one bill, seeing that rent control is a very controversial policy and no-cause evictions are at least less controversial?
Oh, I would, I get your premise, and I would argue, though, that no-cause evictions are shockingly controversial.
Maybe I'll put it a different way.
Yeah.
I'm convinced that no-cause evictions are a blight. I'm not convinced rent control is a solution. I think there are other people like me.
Gotcha.
By pairing those two things together, doesn't it make it harder to keep people in their homes?
Right. Okay, I hear you. I would say, just from a legislative perspective, the pairing of it together was because we knew that the rent stabilization would be the harder push, and so that's why you combine them in the hopes that you can get them through, in combination.
Okay.
So we're always going to ask you the same question that we asked you last time, which is about examples of where you've been independent from either the party platform or
Yeah.
the public employee unions that are the big, pillar of financial support for Democrats. So can you give us an example of a place where you've...
Oh, I was just going to say, I hope you're going to give me reminders of this, because I was on the short side of a couple votes
Okay.
this cycle, but I always have a hard time remembering what they were. The most recent one I can remember had nothing to do with funding or anything. It was a calendaring bill about how we're going to run the next session, and I was the only person to vote against it because the budget office staff said it would make their jobs really a lot harder. And I thought that was an important consideration.
Okay, well, let's try and ratchet up the courage a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, not that that has any significant, and I love when you say, I'm going to ask you the same thing you always ask, because I haven't been here for 4 years.
Oh.
So I've only done this once before, and I forgot. Let me think about that. Ask Jamie something while I'm thinking about that.
Same thing, Jamie. What we're looking for in this question really is some evidence that you're an independent thinker and not just a party line, that you just go along with whatever your party believes that you think for yourself.
Well, I actually tried to change the party line, was the way I did it. So I participated in the Multnomah County Democrats platform legislative priorities process, and as well as the state process. So I got a couple of things crammed in there. So now we're in agreement. That was ones about equalizing class size in K-12 in order to boost the graduation rates. That hit for both the county and the state, but the state they didn't go for the mechanism which I wanted, which was changing the funding formula. And this is something I've been trying to push for the last 10 years and gotten nowhere on. The other one...
How would you change the funding formula?
You add in a small fraction of teacher salary that's in there. It's a cost-sharing contract, essentially what it is. So it's kind of like the transportation side, but it means that you won't have some huge differences in class sizes, like in Eastern Oregon, they're in their teens out there, and here on the the east side of Portland, we're high 20s oftentimes, and that's just because the salaries are different. So you have to take into account there's different salaries in order to treat the children equitably.
So that's a complicated concept, but this isn't complicated. Eastern Oregon is not a Eastern Oregon doesn't have a lot of political power, so why would people not want to do that? Why would people not be interested in a formula that shifted more resources to?
They fought long enough in order to get the resources that they have. In fact, they give the rural schools actually a little bit more money.
Right.
They get more money for transportation, so they admit the costs are different. But they got this point that it's equal dollars, therefore that is fair, instead of having an equal treatment, equal class size for the kids. That's actually what's equitable.
Okay. Okay.
And the more I think about, I'm proud of the fact that I am mostly in agreement with my leadership and indeed the most of the unions that support them and support me, because that's who I am. That's where I come from. I mean, that's what I've done professionally. I believe, unions are an ability for working class people to come together and, come up with issues. And I'm very comfortable with my being in lockstep with them, to be quite honest.
And I didn't give you the parts where I actually disagree.
Okay.
So the parts that we do disagree are things like there were some issues with natural gas that showed up and also fracking. So it's my view that we're going to need some small amount of natural gas generation because of the duck curve. Once we start increasing the amount of solar that's there, there's that high ramping that has to take place in the evening, and so we have to take into account that that's there. That's going to be a tricky part. Also, the state platform now has complete avoidance with fracking. Fracking is actually a technology that can be used for something other than natural gas. In fact, it's pretty useful for geothermal, which we have high capacity along the eastern side of those mountains.
Klamath Falls has a.
Yeah. Well, there's that.
OIT is like completely heated by thermal.
Okay, one issue, then we need to wrap things up. The statewide task force, or maybe it's not a statewide task force, regional group that's looking at tolling I-5 and I-205 started to meet this week. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion previously. We've had people in here this week and last week who are mortally opposed to tolling on equity grounds. We've had people who say it's the only answer to congestion relief and funding. So tell us how you think about tolling.
Sure. So I spent a year on the transportation, a little over a year on the Joint Transportation Committee that traveled around the state and met with folks all over and then worked on that legislation that we didn't get through. And the most important, really my key understanding of that is there's not one thing we can do to deal with our congestion problems. We can't pave our way out, we can't urban plan our way out, we can't bike and transit and ped our way out. We need to add congestion pricing on top of that. And I'm not just saying, I don't want to say tolling. I'll say tolling. I know that's what that is. And it's more than that, though. Congestion pricing you're the economist. Yeah, we can't even, just with our in-migration alone, we can't keep up.
So what about the equity issue? People say that congestion pricing will fall unfairly on people with low incomes.
Yeah, I think there's always ways to account for that. Whether you account for it in over time we move from a gas tax to more of a road mile. If the tiny little project we've been trying to do that we can't get more people to join, even though everybody's willing to give Geico to do a little counter to give it to Geico, but they don't want to do that to deal with their car taxes. I think that there are ways we can get around it, whether it is a credit back on your income taxes if you're at a certain income level, whether it's you move to this. If we move to the road mile thing and you can do a credit, based on your income and that, I think there's ways we can deal with that.
Okay. Jamie, what do you think about tolling or congestion pricing?
In favor. The problem with the congestion pricing, take a look at when it was imposed in London. Effectively what it was is everyone was against it ahead of time and now they love it. Mm-hmm. So if you are low income, you just make sure that you don't drive outside the window, or you start taking a lot more public transit, which was the main thing you do in order to encourage it. So I'm absolutely in favor of it, but you do have to make sure if it's going to be on those bridges, it's got to be on both the bridges. Back in 2013, there was the proposal for the new bridge that was supposed to go over the river, and they didn't do the analysis right. They forgot to model the streets around 205, and already the streets around 205, you can't go on them past 3 o'clock, and you can't go on them until about 7 o'clock, just because it's so crowded from the Washingtonians trying to get home. We really do need some congestion pricing, because if you look at all those cars, they're single people in a car. No one's
I live off of
preserving
Sandy
the roads.
Boulevard, and all morning and all afternoon, it's all cars with Washington plates, just doing that to get around the freeways.
Okay, unfortunately, we are out of time. We have one question for you that we're asking of all candidates. And,
I hate the funny question.
yeah, we haven't even been here before.
I know, but I watch
But
the
he reads the
tape.
paper.
I read the paper and watch the tape.
All right, it's going to be particularly difficult and unpleasant. Uh, what is the most embarrassing thing that has appeared on Facebook about you?
The question is phrased differently, actually. You bungled the fun question.
I don't like the way it's phrased, so you go ahead.
The
and
way it
answer
is phrased is, what is the most embarrassing thing that Facebook knows about you?
Yeah, but see, that assumes that Facebook knows anything.
It
Facebook
knows so
is-
many.
I was going to say, I'm old. Like all of my embarrassing things, I made sure to do long before social media was a thing.
That's a fair answer.
The most embarrassing thing that was there was an old friend of mine from high school posted a picture of me when I was 18. And I looked at the picture and went, huh, I had a tie like that. And
You wore
then
a
I
tie
would,
when you were 18?
yeah, of course I did. Because
You
it was
and
He
I-
the,
stopped wearing it now.
yeah, it was the 80s. And then it took me a good minute and a half to figure out that it was me. And then things kind of blew up from
What,
there.
do you have a mullet or what was it?
No, there's no mullet at the time. The mullet was prior to that.
Post mullet
Yeah.
tie.
Good answers.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I'm sorry we don't have more time.
Thank you.
Oh, we're in the world. Thanks.
All right, thanks to both of you.
Thank you.